All right, well, I want to open up by saying this teaching from WebEx is a new experience for me. I mean, teaching in person is fun and a lot of interaction and all that. The talking to my screen is going to be a challenge for me just to stay engaged and animated and whatever that may be. So I'll just say that at the beginning. But, you know, you can't learn something if you don't start trying it. Everybody see the screen, I assume, Tom? You can see it and
yes,
everything's
very good.
All right, so let's just get into it because we have 5 different Beatitudes to do in a short period of time. So as Tom alluded to, for me, the phraseology of these Beatitudes is important. It says they're more than just attitudes, but they're states of mind or states of being. It says, blessed are the ... So, you know, it's a state of being. It's what we are, not what we do. Jesus wants us to be these things, not just do these things. And it's so easy as a disciple to think about what we need to do and not focus on what we are. And we'll talk more about that in one of the other Beatitudes more specifically. So let's get in. The first one is Matthew 5:6 says, blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they will be filled. You know, as Tom said, we have poor in spirit and hunger and thirst for righteousness. In Luke's kind of parallel, he just uses blessed are the poor and blessed are the hungry. And so it's, you know, it's different perspectives. So we need to understand that Luke is got his lesson he's trying to teach using the gospel and the pulling the things that Jesus said. When I think of hunger and thirst, they are biological desires that cannot be denied but for a short period of time. You know, when you're hungry, you know it. It's not something that you forget about. It's not something that just fades away and you don't realize it. You know, the more you deny it, the stronger it gets. The same with thirst and all that. Psalm 42:1 says, as the deer pants for streams of water, so my soul pants for you. My dog is very demanding when it comes to food and water. And so if we let the dishes get empty, I mean, he is dragging them all over the house pretty obnoxiously to make sure that that we know that there's something missing over there. And, of course, he doesn't know any better, but I think that when it comes to the phrase that Matthew uses and Jesus used, it's a very, very strong feeling that we cannot deny. And yet when we go through our day, I don't know that I'm in touch with that feeling. I don't think that I'm as hungry and thirsty at times as I should be. You know, maybe when things are bad and desperate and things are going poorly and we're deep in prayer, but on a day-to-day basis, am I as hungry and thirsty for the righteousness of God as I should be? But we got to also remember, what are we hungry for? It says specifically righteousness. Now, righteousness is a real religious word that we use. If we look at the, I'm not the Greek scholar that Tom is, but I do know how to use Bible Hub, and I encourage everybody to do that. But it implies that there is a judicial verdict or a divine approval by God, that God's righteousness. So are we hungry for God's justice, and are we hungry for God's approval? I'm reminded of the phrase in the Bible that says, well done, thou good and faithful servant. You know, do we hunger for that approval of God like a child hungers for the approval of their parent? And that desire for approval drives their behavior and drives who they are, you know, sometimes in a bad way. You know, kids that are so much wanting their parents' approval, they do the wrong things to get attention and things like that. And again, as Tom said, I'm really amazed at the context here. We'll talk about this a little bit more just within the Sermon on the Mount. You know, Matthew 6:1 says, "Be careful not to practice your righteousness in front of others, to be seen by them. If you do, you will have no reward from your Father in heaven." So this righteousness that he's talking about there does involve some performance, and in the context there, it's, you know, taking care of the poor. It's what we do for others in our relationship with other people. And Matthew 6:33 says, "Seek first his kingdom and his righteousness, and all these things will be given to you as well." Seeking God's justice and God's approval goes along with seeking his kingdom. And I know as people that have been disciples for a long time, and we kind of have the church thing and the kingdom thing in our mind, and we get focused on seeking the church and seeking the kingdom and spreading the kingdom, but we also need to be focused on promoting and seeking God's righteousness, what he thinks is right, his approval and his justice. But as I always do, I also like to focus on these blessings, and like Tom said, sometimes we get focused on the beginning part and forget about the second part. But it says they will be filled. You know, being filled is more than just not hungry anymore. It's completely satisfied. You know, it's more like stuffed after Thanksgiving meal, you know, where you don't have a need there to eat for several hours. Completely satisfied with God's approval, knowing his approval. Reminding me of Revelation 7:15 through 17 here that says, "For this reason they are before the throne of God, and they serve him day and night in his temple. And he who sits at the throne will spread his tabernacle over them. They will hunger no longer, nor thirst any more, nor will the sun beat down on them or any heat, for the Lamb in the center of the throne will be their shepherd and will guide them to the springs of the water of life, and God will wipe every tear from their eyes." So in the context here, we also need to be led by the shepherd of Jesus to that place where we're filled. Sometimes we want to find our own places to be filled, but we don't trust the shepherd to lead us to the pasture where the feeding takes place. As sheep, you know, we think we have a better idea. So it always focuses, I think, seeking God is also seeking his will in all these things. All right, number 2. Check my watch, see how fast we're going. That's about right. Matthew 5:7 says, "Blessed are the merciful, for they will be shown mercy." You know, the English definition, as Tom said, you got to be careful, but it says compassion or forbearance shown especially to an offender or to one subject to you. You know, I did a little research, and the Greek word, and just about everywhere you look for the Greek word, what the Greek word means in English, it just says mercy. So this is one of those few words where the English word really is a very close copy of the Greek word. Greek for mercy is mercy, and that's comforting. We like to understand. But again, context of other scriptures here in the Sermon on the Mount. But if you do not forgive others their sins, your Father will not forgive your sins. You know, This is a scripture that haunts me when it comes to my relationships with others, when I'm feeling separated, when I've been hurt, and my nature wants to strike back, when I want to hold a grudge in any way. But it says, if you do not forgive, you will not be forgiven. Luke 23:34, Father, forgive them, for they do not know what they're doing. Jesus shows us the example very clearly of this attitude when he is being completely mistreated on the cross. And then Stephen says exactly the same thing, or pretty close to it, in Acts 7:60. And then he fell on his knees and cried out, Lord, do not hold this sin against them. And then we won't have time to read the whole thing, but I encourage you to go look at it. Matthew 18, very familiar parable, the parable of the unmerciful servant. And we know in that story, someone was forgiven a great debt that they did not deserve to be forgiven, and they had no hope of paying back. And their response was to demand payment by someone who owed them a small debt. And the master, as Jesus is portrayed here, God is portrayed as the master, was not pleased by short. I would say to say that he was not pleased is an understatement. He, threw the man and his family and everything in prison until he could pay an unpayable debt. So this gives us the heart of God when it comes to forgiveness. And of course, the whole point there is the man did not realize he had been forgiven. He forgot completely that he had been forgiven. So when we don't see our need for mercy, we don't feel a need to give mercy. We begin to look down on the behavior of others and justify ourselves. This, again, all points back to the previous Beatitudes, the poor in spirit, the mourning. When we don't mourn for our sin, it means that we don't realize we need to be forgiven. When we are not poor in spirit, we think we've got it all together. And then we start to look down on others. I do remember the old Church of Christ story where the guy read this passage and said, thank God I'm not like the Pharisee, and then he got up and prayed at the end of the sermon after somebody else got up after the preacher gave the sermon and prayed, thank God we're not like these Pharisees. The point can go in many different ways. But by definition, mercy is always given to those who don't deserve it. So when we give mercy, it cannot be based on whether the person deserves it or not. And our nature of keeping this balance in the scale, we'll give to the homeless person if we think that they're worthy in some way or that they haven't earned their bad plight. We just tend to hold these grudges. It's so crazy to think about it that way. But by definition, when we're giving mercy, the person doesn't deserve it. I've had a few opportunities when someone has wronged me in business or in church to forgive and I'm amazed how many people, when they hear about some of those stories, I don't know how you could do that. I mean, that's their response. Even disciples say, I don't know how you can do that. And the only way we can do this is to remember that we need the mercy of God more than anything else. Mercy is delivering from judgment. So sometimes we get confused about mercy and grace here. So I saw this somewhere. It says mercy is when you deliver someone from judgment, from what they deserve, from what they've earned. Grace is giving kindness to the unworthy. And so this mercy thing is even a stronger thing than grace itself. We receive favor from God. We receive blessings from God all the time that we don't deserve. but the mercy received from God, the forgiveness of our deserved punishment. And when we're like Jesus, then we will also be giving others mercy rather than punishment, not giving them what they've earned. So the blessing's pretty easy on this one. You will receive mercy. You know, if you really have the mourning spirit and the poor in spirit, the desire to be forgiven, and it goes right along with the passage in Matthew 6. If we don't forgive, we won't be forgiven. The opposite of that is if we do forgive, we will be forgiven. If we do give mercy, we will receive mercy. And we all know when we mess up. We all know when we sin. We all know when we have hurt someone, and we desperately want to receive forgiveness. Even when we hurt individuals, it's exactly what the previous Beatitudes show that we need, and what we've realized that we need. All right, next. Pure in heart. Blessed are the pure in heart, for they will see God. Pure. What do you think of when you think of pure? Clean. You know, we have pure streams that are crystal clear, have no pollutants, no other stuff, not even any natural dirt. They're just flowing over rocks, and there's just pure water. Unstained, either literally or ceremonially or spiritually. Guiltless. Innocent. The word upright comes in there. Then in heart is, you know, the heart is a theme. We're going to talk about this in our inner life. Our intentions are pure. Our character is pure. Our desires are pure. You know, when I read that, I think this is impossible. This goes along with Tom's impossible dream, to think that my heart is pure. Pure in my heart, pure in my intentions and my character. You know, sometimes I can gut it out and do the right thing, but it's a much bigger challenge to have a heart that wants to do these things, that wants to treat people in these ways. And so that is the challenge, is to do it. Scriptures again in context. Matthew 5:28, when Jesus starts talking about the things to do later in the Sermon on the Mount, he talks about lust and says that the man has committed adultery with her in his heart. It goes along with this pure in heart. Lust is not a pure in heart action. Matthew 6:21, for where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. So it gets, are we pure in our heart even with our finances and what we know about them? So the heart is a theme that it repeats in Jesus' teachings. This would have been, as Tom said, countercultural, everything for the Jews, because they were all about the actions and very little about the heart. The Pharisees themselves were pure in action, but they were not pure in heart. Paul later, when he talks about his life as a Pharisee, you know, he touts all the good things he did as a Pharisee, and they were all pretty good. But he was not pure of heart. He was not pure in heart in how he treated people in particular. Tom reminded me this concept here, Psalm 51, when David has sinned with Bathsheba, in that psalm, he says in verse 10, create in me a pure heart, O God, and renew a steadfast spirit within me. just when we read that, we say, this is impossible. I can't have a pure heart. But God can give us a pure heart. God can create in us a pure heart. We have the Holy Spirit, which is speaking to us and trying to help us purge the other heart out. But we can't have a pure heart on our own. Only with God can we have a pure heart. Goes back to what Tom said when Tolstoy went crazy, trying to live the Sermon on the Mount without the Spirit, without Jesus. He could not do it, and it drove him insane. And so we can do this the same. We can try to gut it out as disciples and say, I can do this, I know I can do this, I can do this, and then we have a bad day, or somebody says the wrong thing to us and we blow up, or our wife disappoints us, our children make us angry, whatever it may be. We cannot accomplish this without God giving us a new heart. This comes out again also, as Tom alluded to, we're going to look at Isaiah 6. This concept of a blessing of you will see God. To me, this one kind of stands out as like a wow factor. Because in the Old Testament, over and over, when anyone thought they were going to see God or were about to see God, they were deathly afraid because they thought they would die. Just to see God would kill you. And so consequently, in God's interaction with Elijah, he's hiding, in a cave as he kind of goes by. We have Moses, who is extremely changed when he just sees God. Others, they're just angels came in their presence, and, they want to die. So we have in Isaiah 6 where Isaiah is taken up to heaven in the presence of God. And he says, woe to me, I cried, I am ruined, for I am a man of unclean lips, and I live among a people of unclean lips. And my eyes have seen the King, the Lord Almighty. The unclean meaning just the opposite of pure. He did not have pure lips. He lived with people that did not have pure lips. They were unclean. And so he expected to die when he saw God. But then in the next verses, it says, then one of the seraphim flew to me with a live coal in his hand, which he had taken for tongs from the altar. With it he touched my mouth and said, see, this has touched your lips. Your guilt is taken away and your sin atoned for. So even in this passage, Isaiah did not purify his own heart, his own lips. They were purified, by the minister of God, the seraphim. That God had to intervene to purify, just like he does for us. We cannot purify our own hearts. We need God's intervention through the cross, through the Spirit living in us. It is truly the impossible dream. But with God, all things are possible. Even Jesus said that it was impossible for the rich to become Christians. And then he said, with God, even that's possible. Okay. That's 3. Let's take a break and see if there's any comments or questions. Tom, you can do the unmute thing. So, anything stand out to anybody? Anybody have anything, any questions or their favorite scripture that reminds them of some of these things?
Dave, this is Ryan again.
Hey.
I know in the book, so Tom already made the point that the Beatitudes are progressive. I think in the book it says that they're kind of in couplets, and then the first 4 are internal, the second 4 are external, and I thought it made such a good point in the book about being pure in heart, because as you go out to show mercy, you may either find failure or success in that, and both can affect your heart in a different way, right? If you try to show mercy to others and they don't accept it, that can be really frustrating. And so, or if they do accept it, then you can begin to bolster your pride, because you think as you're progressing down that list, like, you've already kind of come a long way. And you figure by that point you really wouldn't be struggling with being pure in heart. But we all know from our experience, in ministry that, man, it can, even that far down the line, you can really be struggling to just have a pure motive. We talk a lot about that here, like just love your neighbor without the outcome in mind, just because Jesus said to do it and it's right to love them. And if they get baptized, great. If they don't, that's okay too. You still should love. So it's so challenging. You're just like, golly, like, so challenging.
Well, for me, I view almost as the longer I'm a Christian, the more I'm aware of how unpure my heart is.
Right.
Because I see it more in the small things, and again, as you interact with people more and more, that it's challenged to respond the way Jesus did. Yes.
Yeah. Oh, Sarasota. He's in Sarasota. He went from Knoxville to Sarasota.
I did.
All right. Anybody else? All right, let's move on then. You want to mute us, Tom?
I will. Take care of it.
All right. So the next one is Matthew 5:9. It says, "Blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called children of God." So a peacemaker, that's a pretty good English structure. I think we can handle that, is a person who makes peace. Now, that peace could be between men. That is the first thing we think of, in the general population. A peacemaker is a person who brings peace between men. We think of ambassadors. We think of Jimmy Carter with, the Jews and the Arabs and the peacemaking that was attempted there that obviously didn't last. But, we think of people that bring opposing parties together. But it more likely, particularly in the context, is about peace between man and God. How do we make peace between man and God? We preach reconciliation. By definition, we need to be reconciled to God. The world needs to be reconciled to God. As peacemakers, we are the go-betweens trying to bring men closer to God. Peace between men is only possible when both are at peace with God. And we've talked about this some at church with, the world is all about divisions, the political divisions, the racial divisions, the economic divisions, just you name it, the nationalistic divisions. The world is all about dividing, and yet the world thinks that it can make peace. The only way that the world can make peace between sides is through compromise and tolerance they want to preach. But the only true peace comes from surrender. The only true peace that we get is with God is through surrender. And some people want to approach their relationship with God in the same way that the world does with peace. We want to negotiate. We want to compromise. Well, God, if you'll do this for me, I'll do this for you. And maybe I'll take in a little bit of change my life, and that's going to make me at peace with God. But the only way to have peace with God is with surrender. And so, as Tom likes to say, this is the evangelistic beatitude. We are more active in this. We are peacemakers. We are people that preach reconciliation. Other scriptures to put in this, Jeremiah 6:14, it says, they dress the wounds of my people as though it were not serious. Peace, peace, they say, when there is no peace. Again, the prophets at the time were preaching that everything was okay between the people and God. This is common in religious world today, you know. The prosperity gospel, all kinds of things that want to say that our relationship with God is good and that it's easy. And what Jeremiah says, they're not taking it seriously, you know, and that's our role as peacemakers, is to get people to take seriously their relationship with God rather than superficially. Ephesians 6:5, and with your feet fitted with the readiness that comes from the gospel of peace. It's right there in the armors that we receive, putting on the whole armor of God. So the feet fitted with readiness that comes from the gospel. The gospel is a gospel of peace. Peace between man and God. And then James 4 kind of shows the other side of that coin in 4:4. You adulterous people, don't you know that friendship with the world means enmity against God? Therefore, anyone who chooses to be a friend of the world becomes an enemy of God. And so when two people are enemies, then that's when peace is needed. And yet things have to change in the relationship. The only way that we can have peace with God is when we cease to be enemies with God. And according to this, the only way we can become peace with God and not be enemies of God is not be friends with the world. And that, as we know, as we study the Bible with people, is the biggest problem, is people don't want to let go of their friendship with the world. And you cannot have peace with God unless you give up your friendship with the world. And it's attitudes, it's values, it's just pull for time and everything else. So we need to have peace, but we need to be peacemakers. So what's the blessing? The blessing is that we're going to be called children of God. Now, I thought it was interesting in this where it says, we'll be called children of God. We're not receiving something. We're not going to be something. We're going to be called children of God. And so what we are called is important. You know, what you're called. Are you called a boss? Are you called a man? Are you called a good man? Are you called an athlete? What we're called sometimes is important to us. Acts 11:26, it says the disciples were first called Christians. And that calling came from outside, not from God, but from the world. The world called them Christians. And to them, it was a derogatory statement at the time to say they were like Christ, you know. It was more of an insult to them. We've kind of grabbed it and made it a positive thing, but at the time it was an insult that they were called Christ-like. Children are also heirs and representatives of the parents. You know, in today's political scene, Donald Trump's children are, you know, his biggest proponents and are out there, you know, talking about their father. The Bushes have their own. Chelsea is up there talking about her mother and father. You know, children are often called upon to be representatives of the parents. You know, even on the playground, you know, the guys say, well, my dad's better than your dad. My dad can beat your dad. My dad is smarter than your dad. It's just our nature to represent our parents in these ways. And to be called children of God means that the people we're talking to recognize who our father is, recognize who our parent is, and they make that connection. And we get the honor of being called that, being called. So what an honor to be called a child of God. I mean, which comes from the world seeing somehow a connection between us and God. And it comes through this concept of being a peacemaker. When we go out and try to make peace between man and God, people recognize that we're doing it for God, not for ourselves, that we are his representatives. And they say, well, you know, you must be a child of God. I'm reminded also even when the apostles were brought before the Sanhedrin after Jesus was gone, and it said they took note that the men had been with Jesus. You know, the way they acted, the things they said, just their beliefs, everything oozed Jesus. And so that's kind of the call for us to be peacemakers, is our lives must ooze the message of peace with God. So it just really challenges me in my day-to-day life, because I get so focused at work and I'm with the same people every day, and I tend to segment my life where this is my church life. Oh, I'm going to share my faith hat and go out and meet people or whatever. But a peacemaker is always a peacemaker. A representative of God is always a representative of God in all situations and at all times. And then the people around us notice that, and they call us children of God. Now, I have the ... after this, because it says, if God is rejected, so will we be rejected. You know, you get both sides of it. Oh, you're a child of God. That's a great thing. But if somebody doesn't like God, then they're not going to like his children either, which does progress right into the next beatitude, which is the last section, where it says, blessed are those who have been persecuted. This one's a little bit different in that it's not blessed are those who are or whatever, but it is a little bit more action-oriented to what's happening to us in this. Blessed are those who have been persecuted for the sake of righteousness, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are you when people insult you and persecute you and falsely say all kinds of evil against you because of me. Rejoice and be glad, for your reward in heaven is great. For in the same way they persecuted the prophets who were before you. Now, remember the context of this is the very beginning of the Sermon on the Mount, which is the very beginning of Jesus' ministry. This seems like more something he would say in Matthew 28 as he's going up to heaven. But, you know, Jesus makes it clear from the very beginning what the cost of following him is going to be. He doesn't pull any punches with a mob, a crowd of people that are listening to the new preacher, the new Messiah, the new man preaching about the kingdom, which the Jews have all been waiting for forever. And he lays it out right at the beginning. Sometimes we're afraid to let somebody know what the cost of being a disciple is at the beginning, kind of save it for the end. But Jesus puts it right here at the beginning and lets people know. And he's under no uncertain terms, you're going to be crucified because of righteousness and because of Jesus. To be persecuted, we need to get that in context too. To be persecuted is more than just to be mistreated in the moment. You know, sometimes we feel persecuted when somebody doesn't like us or tells us not to share our faith or says we're ugly or, you know, you Bible thumper, blah, 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 you know, whatever. We think, oh, I was persecuted. Persecuted implies that you are hunted and chased down. people will go after you. Now, we know in Acts that it says that Saul persecuted the church. What did he do? He went from house to house. He even went to another city to go find disciples, to just pull them out of their homes. It wasn't just, running them off of campus or something. He went after them. I don't think many of us have experienced that. Paul, it's interesting to note that, Paul received what he gave because he got run out of town and then they even chased him to the next town. And so he was also chased down and persecuted in the same way that he did to others. And I'm sure that connection never was lost in him. I'm sure that helped him to endure it because he knew that he had given it as much as he was receiving. To be insulted is a little bit different than, what we hear in politics today. You're ugly, you're a crook, you're, a buffoon, whatever. It's a little more than that. The Greek word implies to be reproached, as in considering someone to be guilty and deserving punishment. So the state that we're in is we're chased down because people think we're guilty, that we deserve punishment. Jesus and Stephen were killed because they were considered guilty and dangerous, not just disliked. The Christians in the first century were pursued and persecuted because they just refused to recognize the emperor as a god. And so that was the way that the Roman Empire kept control over the people. And so if the people grabbed this teaching, then that would have just disrupted the whole empire. And so they were pursued and persecuted because they were obviously not harming anyone. They weren't doing anything to anyone. They were fighting the status quo. They were disturbing what was there. And so therefore they were guilty of punishment for not being willing to recognize, an authority that was not divine. I had something on my head and I just lost it. Anyway, moving on. But we do have to be careful what we're persecuted for. Peter makes a point. He's got a whole section in there about suffering as a disciple, suffering as a Christian. But he makes a big point. He says, okay, but how is it to your credit if you receive a beating for doing wrong and endure it? But if you suffer for doing good and you endure it, this is to be commendable before God. This is kind of one of my little soapboxes. I hear people talk about, okay, well, I prefer to go, just 75 or 80 on the interstate, even though the speed limit is 80. But if I get stopped, I'll just pay my ticket. And the attitude that it's okay to break the law as long as you're willing to accept the punishment. But we pick and choose what laws, well, I really didn't like this guy, so I'm going to murder him, but I know I'll have to go to jail, but that's okay. I'll just take my punishment. We don't ascribe that same attitude to a lot of different things. And so when you're at work and you are a bad employee and you suffer for being a bad employee, well, it's because I'm a Christian. No, it's because you were just not doing what the boss told you to do. But then in other situations, you share your faith, you treat people kindly. You can have people that will go after you and will lie about you and try to get you fired and try to get you, demoted in some way. You know, in our culture right now, standing up for Christian values is considered intolerant. There are even laws on the books in the U.S. now that if you stand by your faith, you know, you are violating someone's rights or violating the law in some way. And so we're moving into a period of time where I believe more and more Christianity and the values of Christianity are going to become pursued, because as our culture becomes more worldly, then the stand of God will be more noticeable. And I think that this is something that we can think of as coming down the road. But blessing is that yours is the kingdom of the heavens. And I pulled that in because that's kind of the Greek structure in there, the kingdom of the heavens. And as Tom said, you know, Matthew is liking to pull his Jewish audience and remind them of Old Testament things, whereas in other places it's the kingdom of God. But this kingdom of the heavens is just a big deal. The other thing is, it is exactly the same blessing for the first beatitude. It's the exact phraseology. Theirs is the kingdom of the heavens. And then in this it says, theirs is the kingdom of the heavens. You know, as people have taught me how to study the Bible, they have pointed out that it's important to look for phrases that bookend other phrases. Like when you say the same thing at the beginning and the end of a chapter or the beginning of a paragraph, and then you say the same at the end. They're bookends that kind of pull that whole chunk together and say this makes a full statement here. So in the Beatitudes, this section is Jesus is, and Matthew is marking this as kind of, this is the introduction to the Sermon on the Mount, as Tom says. This is the foundation. Okay, now let's go on and put some flesh on these principles and how they're put into practice as we go through the rest of the Sermon on the Mount. And it really does make it look a little bit different to us. All right, so remembering the cultural context, again, the kingdom was all the Jews were waiting for. They just did not understand what it really is. And so when Jesus uses the terminology of kingdom, and Matthew uses the terminology of kingdom, this is not an accident. This is, I mean, we read about rebellions every couple years in Judea where people are saying they're reestablishing the kingdom of God, the kingdom of the heavens. And so this kingdom thinking is very strong in the Sermon on the Mount. So verse 12 says that our reward is in the heavens, not in life. We back up to that. Verse 12, too far. Says your reward in heaven is great. Sometimes we don't receive the rewards for being a disciple in this life. We have to be prepared for that. Hebrews 11 talks about many of the prophets that never received their blessing in this life. And then, so again, Jesus is, you know, in his first study, he's got his group together. He's doing his first study. We do the word study. He does counting the cost. He gives them the Beatitudes of all the things that they need to be and then count the cost. So it's a little different. I know Tom was talking about the other day that a lot of times in his studies, one of the first things he does with people is go through the Beatitudes and show the difference in the mind of God versus the mind of the world. And this is definitely what we need to learn. All right, so summary, since we're finishing all the Beatitudes before we move on, I thought I'd throw a couple things in here. Since these are the opening remarks of the Sermon on the Mount, the way Matthew has organized it, all the practical instructions in the rest of the sermon hang on these 8 statements of character. As we continue to study, I think it's important that we actively think about which of the Beatitudes Jesus may be elaborating on with each part of the sermon that follows. You know, it really helps you in your study to think of some way to dig a little deeper. And one way is, okay, Jesus talks about these things of marriage. What Beatitudes, what attitudes come into play in this practical application, and in prayer and all the things that come in down the road. So that's my challenge as we go through this, is as we go into the rest of the Sermon on the Mount, to always be looking back to the Beatitudes and see which one is this hanging on, which more than one is this hanging on. And so, and that's it. That's all I had. So, man, not bad timing, I guess. So appreciate it. Any comments, questions as we do here in the last 10 minutes or so?
Let me see if this is
Okay, Dave, thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you.
Just a comment that I would add here at the end is, you know, some people would read through the first 7 Beatitudes and maybe come away saying, boy, this is really a nice person who lives out these. And then you get to number 8 and it's like, well, this person's going to be persecuted. It shows, I think, a couple of things. One, we didn't take the other Beatitudes as deep as we needed to. But then, secondly, we don't understand that the world is going to react to this true life of God being poured into people and God's righteousness. It's going to be in such contrast that we're going to get a real strong reaction. And as we go further in the study, I know we'll talk about more even about the reaction of being merciful to even persecutors. Well, we're getting somebody's audio on big time. But guys, it's time to quit. But
which gate are y'all on? This is 3. 3? Okay.
Thanks so much. It's encouraging to have you all. You'll be receiving the
gate
link
3.
To the recordings sometime this afternoon.
So we probably got to go down.
Thanks so much, and we'll see you in 2 weeks on October the 15th.
Thanks, Tom. Thanks, Dave.
Thanks a lot, guys. This was great.
Okay.
All right.